Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in today because we are looking at the true, comprehensive foundations of America. And actually, we aren't just starting in 1776 or even 1492. We're rewinding the clock thousands of years, long before Europeans ever arrived, to uncover this incredible, rich tapestry of innovation, exploration, and dramatic transformation that literally built the nation we know today. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. First, we'll look at the brilliant indigenous innovations of the pre-Columbian era. Then move through the dawn of European colonization and examine the colonial economies and the institution of slavery. After that, we'll chart the revolution and wrap up with the complex formation of the new republic. It's a lot of ground to cover, so let's go.
First up, Section 1. The Pre-Columbian Era and Indigenous Innovations. This story really kicks off roughly 10,000 to 30,000 years ago with the crossing of the Bering Strait during the Ice Age. That incredible migration set the ultimate stage for amazingly diverse and brilliant indigenous cultures to flourish all across the Americas. Now, I want to pose a question directly to you. What do rubber, corn, and kayaks all have in common? Take a second to think about it, because the answer is kind of mind-blowing and totally reshapes our understanding of everyday items we completely take for granted.
The answer? Native Americans actually invented, or first cultivated, every single one of them. I mean, I was amazed to learn that native farmers in Guatemala and Mexico formerly cultivated corn around 10,000 years ago. They turned it into this incredibly nutritious staple way before Europeans even knew it existed. And rubber? Indigenous communities were harvesting and processing natural rubber long before Charles Goodyear revolutionized the industry in the 1830s. Oh, and they engineered kayaks for rapid water transport using a brilliant cockpit-like design to keep the paddler totally safe and dry. They even developed advanced botanical pain relievers and early forms of oral contraceptives. Just incredible stuff.
Let's look closer at another amazing adaptation. The Inuit people lived in some of the harshest, most unforgiving winter environments on the planet. To survive brutal blizzards, they invented snow goggles. Made meticulously out of animal bone and skin, they were perfectly designed to prevent snow blindness. You might even be surprised to know they crafted specialized, sturdy wooden storage boxes just to protect them. It's a brilliant design that honestly mirrors the protective eyewear we use on the ski slopes today.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer engineering prowess of early civilizations. The Inca civilization engineered these massive, intricate suspension bridges out of nothing but grass, vines, and tree bark. We aren't talking about tiny little footbridges here. These things spanned massive canyons and rivers, rivaling the span of some modern concrete bridges in Europe. Amazingly, the tradition survives, and one of these woven grass rope bridges is still actively maintained and exists in Peru today.
Their medical knowledge was equally astounding. For example, indigenous people in Virginia used local flora like Jimson weed to treat broken bones. But what's really fascinating is their use of black willow tea for pain relief. Well, as it turns out, black willow contains a chemical called salicin. When you ingest it, it converts into salicylic acid, which is literally the exact same chemical base found in our modern everyday aspirin.
To wrap up these inventions, consider the hammock. When Christopher Columbus arrived in the Caribbean, he noticed indigenous peoples relaxing and sleeping in suspended vine hammocks. This was an absolute revelation. European sailors quickly adopted this native invention because it completely revolutionized how crews slept at sea. Instead of being violently thrown onto the hard wooden decks, they could sway safely with the motion of the ship. You can only imagine the sheer relief those sailors must have felt. A real game changer.
That brings us to Section 2, the dawn of European colonization. The arrival of the Old World marked a massive, incredibly complex turning point for the entire North American continent. It changed its trajectory forever.
Let's walk through this rapid wave of arrivals. It all kicks off in 1492 with Columbus in the Caribbean. Following him, between 1513 and 1539, Spanish explorers like Ponce de Leon and de Soto pushed into the south and east. Then, fast forward to 1607, the British managed to settle Jamestown, their first successful permanent colony. And by 1621, the Dutch established New Netherland to capitalize on the fur trade. Famously, the Dutch bought the island of Manhattan from local Native Americans for the equivalent of just $24, renaming it New Amsterdam before it eventually became New York.
This whole collision of worlds created what historians call the Columbian Exchange. It was this immense biological and cultural transfer. Europeans brought over horses, cattle, and pigs to the Americas. In return, the Americas provided Europe with life-altering crops like corn, tobacco, potatoes, and squash. However, we also absolutely have to objectively note the deeply tragic side of this exchange. Europeans brought over unexposed diseases like smallpox and measles. These diseases completely decimated indigenous populations and caused entire native societies to collapse.
Moving right along to Section 3, Colonies, Economy, and Slavery. As the British solidified their 13 colonies along the East Coast, the distinct geographies of the North and South ended up creating vastly different economies and consequently completely different social structures.
Notice the stark contrast between these two regions. The New England colonies up north had really rocky, uneven soil, terrible for large-scale farming, so they adapted. They became this industrial, trade-focused region built on timber mills, shipbuilding, and bustling trade ports like Boston. On the flip side, the southern colonies enjoyed incredibly rich, fertile soil. They became strictly agriculturally driven, entirely reliant on massive plantations. In places like Virginia, tobacco quickly became the ultimate cash crop, right alongside rice and indigo in the Carolinas.
So the crucial point is, 1619. This is a foundational, sobering year in American history. It was in 1619, just 12 years after Jamestown was founded, that the first enslaved Africans were brought to the Virginia colony. The stark reality here is that as agricultural demands absolutely exploded, particularly for labor-intensive crops like tobacco and later cotton, the colony's reliance on indentured servants from Europe shifted to a brutal, institutionalized system of lifelong hereditary slavery. To put that into perspective, by 1770, enslaved Africans made up a full 1/5, 20% of the entire American population.
All right, let's shift gears to Section 4, Revolution and the Freedom Struggle. Following the French and Indian War, Great Britain needed to pay off massive war debts, and, well, they looked to the 13 colonies to foot the bill. This sparked rising political tensions as the colonies slowly began to unite against British control.
At the very heart of this tension was a core concept: no taxation without representation. It's a phrase you've definitely heard, but what it meant practically was that the colonists felt their fundamental rights as Englishmen were being totally violated. They basically argued that a distant British Parliament, a place where they had absolutely zero elected voice, had no moral or legal right to impose taxes on them.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because this tension sparked a rapid cause-and-effect escalation. First, in 1765, Parliament passes the Stamp Act, taxing paper goods. The colonists resist. Then, in 1773, citizens famously protest tea taxes with the Boston Tea Party. Britain retaliates hard in 1774 with the Intolerable Acts, effectively putting Massachusetts under military rule. The breaking point finally hits in April 1775 when the first shots of all-out war are fired at Lexington and Concord. And by 1776, it all culminates in the ultimate step: the Declaration of Independence.
Listen to these powerful words. These united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. That was Richard Henry Lee's resolution, adopted by the Second Continental Congress in early July 1776. It was the definitive point of no-return break from the British Empire, totally setting the stage for the formal Declaration of Independence just days later.
Now, what actually united these rebellious colonists wasn't just anger at taxes, it was a shared ideology known as republicanism. And this wasn't merely a style of government, guys, it was a complete way of life. It meant entirely rejecting the European aristocracy, prioritizing civic duty, and holding an uncompromising commitment to liberty. It was this very ideal that was championed by leaders like George Washington, and it's what drove the Patriot forces through years of grueling war.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the formation of the new republic. Winning the war against the British was monumental for sure, but forging a brand new nation from scratch, that proved to be an incredibly challenging task.
In 1789, under a newly ratified constitution, George Washington stepped up as the first president. His leadership was absolutely vital. He had kept the military unified during war, and as president, he established a strong, respected national government. But honestly, perhaps his most important act was his last one. By voluntarily stepping down from power after 2 terms and outright rejecting a third, he established a vital precedent for the peaceful transition of power.
The young republic faced rapid expansion and immediate tests. The Constitution was drafted in 1789, and civil rights were codified with the Bill of Rights by 1791. Then, in 1803, President Thomas Jefferson orchestrated the Louisiana Purchase, which essentially doubled the size of the country overnight and fueled westward expansion. But peace was fragile. By 1812, intense political divisions between Federalists and Republicans, along with British naval harassment and territorial disputes involving Native Americans, plunged the new nation right back into war with Britain.
We've covered a massive expanse of time today, so I want to leave you with this provocative thought. How do the ancient inventions of Native Americans and the democratic ideals of the 18th century continue to shape our world today? Think about it. When you take an aspirin or vote in an election, you are actively participating in a timeline that spans thousands of years of human triumph and struggle. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive for today's Explainer. Stay curious and keep exploring the history that built our present.